Hey folks, good morning. We're going to give people just another minute or two to get on, but welcome to our first webinar in the Application Nation series. We'll give them till 2 after, and then we'll get started because we got a lot to cover. All right, let's get this show on the road. So this meeting is being recorded just for your information to let you know ahead of time. Welcome to the first Application Nation webinar in a series of webinars that we'll be having quarterly from here on out. This is a good first topic, mixing and spraying 101. And you're in for a treat because we have two excellent presenters today. First, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what Application Nation is. Application Nation is a members-only group of IVM professionals, and it's for education, collaboration, industry insights. We'll have get-togethers at different industry events over the next year, at different trade show events and things like that, so that we can all meet each other and collaborate and network. We do have a welcome box for everyone who registers for Application Nation. The first round of those went out about a month ago, and the second round went out this week. So if you registered for Application Nation in the last month, you can expect to see your box in the next couple of days. The boxes do have a travel mug. We have a multi-tool in there, some stickers, and some other goodies. You do have to be registered on the Application Nation website to get your welcome box. And if you want to register, you can follow the QR code that's on the screen right now and just go ahead and put in your information. Reason you have to be registered is so that we can have your address to ship the box and other goodies over the coming months. We do have some door prizes today. We have 3 pairs of Oakley Holbrook sunglasses. They're very nice looking. I'll be drawing after the webinar, and I'll notify the winners after the webinar. Again, you do have to be a registered Application Nation member to win one of the door prizes today. So if you haven't done that, it's a real quick registration. The QR code's on this sheet as well. So if you register during the webinar, then you still qualify for the drawing. I also wanted to tell you that we have a quick reference one-sheeter on proper mixing and spraying that goes along with the webinar that you'll be listening to today. So I'm going to put that file in the chat so you can download it, but we'll also email it out to all Application Nation members this week or early next week. So you can look for that, or you can download it out of the chat. All right, let's get started. So we have 2 excellent presenters today, Shannon Clark and Jerry Ellis. Jerry's our Envu sales manager for the Pacific Northwest. He's got 30 years of experience working with herbicides and pesticides as a trainer, a distributor, an applicator, and also a manufacturer representative. He loves to share his experiences, and Jerry also tells great stories. So you're in for a treat. And then Shannon is our development and technical services manager. You might also have heard their team called the Stewardship team. And this is in range and pasture and vegetation management. So she covers the Upper Plains region. She received her PhD in weed science from Colorado State University in 2019 and continued there as a postdoc researcher before she came over to Bayer and then Envu. So welcome, Shannon, and welcome, Jerry. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry to kick us off.
Thank you. So to give you a little bit more background of myself and why I'm giving a lot of this talk today is I've been in the business more than 40 years. And growing up in Roundup, Montana is where I grew up. Naturally, you got to end up selling Roundup because of that reason. And everybody always says that Roundup or glyphosate's expensive. And I told them, I go, it's not expensive. Back when I started spraying Roundup in 1983, it was $150 a gallon. And you would have thought back then it was liquid gold. But a lot of times we were only spraying 8 ounces. So that was about $10 an acre that it costs to do. So I always tell people, so one of the first tricks, you'll see a lot of products that are expensive now, but we're using low rates. So like Esplanade, we're at 5 ounces per acre. And if you look at our dollar amount and when you figure it out, it's actually probably around $55 an acre. So I tell people you got to look at that because like Diaron at $25 at 2.5 gallons is over $60 an acre. So you need to look at a per acre cost on a product when dealing with that. The other thing is when I started in the business, I actually had a 35 lawn care business in high school. And in Montana, we could start spraying when we were young. So I started spraying LV6 to kill dandelions in lawn. The LV6 was in glass bottles. So that kind of tells you how old I am due to that, because you guys probably haven't seen herbicides in glass bottles, but they used to come in gallons and 5-gallon glass bottles way back when. And back then, we didn't know like LV6. We knew it volatiles some, but we didn't know why. And even calibrating back then was something that we didn't do that you need to do today. So I'm going to go through a lot of slides here and kind of give you some tricks or things that you could do to help improve your application. And one of the things that always comes up at least 1 to 3 times a year with customers is we always have mixing issues. And if anything out of today, I would tell you normally most of the mixing issues is because most people are putting Roundup in the tank first. Even when Esplanade came back out 15 years ago, I had a couple of complaints a year, and it always was because they put Roundup in the tank first. And Shannon will go over the mixing order later, but that's usually the number one product. So you need to make sure that you read the mixing directions on your label, because a lot of times Roundup's towards the end of the deal, the mixing orders. So I've seen a lot of this, and it's usually because of wettable powders. If you've ever sprayed Crovar or Sahara or products like that, normally sometimes they'll look like that, or you can also get things that look like silicone or styrofoam in your tank too. And we kind of know, us older guys over the years, what has caused some issues. I always tell people to start with clean water. That's probably the most important thing, because if you don't start with clean water, things can happen in the tank, and I'll talk about those here shortly. Well water is normally hard, and glyphosate is tied up by hard water. Esplanade method, Plainview, products like that aren't tied up by hard water. So that's one thing good about those products. But if you are putting glyphosate in the tank to kill weeds that are up, normally the glyphosate's tied up by hard water. So I always tell people to test, and I'll show you here shortly why. Most time city water is neutral, so normally you don't have to worry about putting water conditioners or things like that in the tank with it, but there is fluoride and other biocarbonates that could cause issues too. Creek and river water is normally a 6 pH and not hard, so the only thing that I tell people, if you are pulling out of creeks or river, make sure you have a double filtering system. That way you could tie up soil particles. And this is, I had at least 3 or 4 customers over the last 35 years where we have had issues with people pulling out of irrigation water out of canals. So I tell people stay away from pulling water out of irrigation canals because it contains soil particles. And it's normally that water is not hard because it's come out of a river, but the soil particles will tie up your Roundup or glyphosate or things like that. So always use clean water. Now, as far as water hardness goes, I always tell people to test your water for like pH because like Flumigard, Payload, any Flumi product is affected by high pH water. And like up in my area, our water is like a 7.4 pH. So if Payload or any of those products sit in the tank overnight, they're gone the next day because of the higher pH water. As far as total hardness, if you test for that, if you have well water, usually Roundup and quinclorac is tied up at 100 parts per million. 2,4-D, dicamba, Tordon, products like that are tied up usually at over 300 parts per million. And then there are bicarbonates that will tie up some of the products too, like with total hardness. And so in order to test for those, you can send in a water test, which usually probably costs you about 45 or 50 bucks to get it done. The cheapest way is to get pH and water hardness strips off the internet. You can go to your hot tub store and get those. Buy them off Amazon. A lot of distributors in my area carry them and give them out free. The only thing you got to watch out for is the shelf life on these test strips are only a year. So do look at when they were produced, because if they're more than a year old, usually they're not going to work. And that's how you can tell cheaply how hard your water is or the pH of your water. Calibration after water is probably the next important thing. And our next event that we have, we're probably going to do calibration. That way you guys and we can go into depth in it. I won't go into depth in it today. But calibration is real important. I've seen trucks that the nozzles, when they were put back after they were cleaned out at the end of the season, were not put in alignment in the spray head correctly. So you need to make sure you put those back correctly, because usually what happens is you have a skip in your herbicide treatment and you don't have a kill. So you got to make sure of that. You also need to make sure that your nozzles are overlapping when you spray too, because I've had an instance where the nozzles like 48 inches out from the highway did not overlap each other, and we actually had a line for miles of kochia that came up in like a 3-inch area, and you can usually see that very easily. Calibrating side-by-sides, ATV, and backpack are all important too. And that way you can make sure that you're not wasting a lot of your product. And you can buy calibration equipment like this that you can hook up to your nozzles that can help you with that. Or you could buy water sensitive paper. That way you could see your pattern, because usually a pattern like I have on there shows that, especially with the contact herbicides or even some of the herbicides that you need to get good coverage, spray pattern like that's very good, and that will show you that. Sometimes with like Roundup, because it's a translocating product, you don't have to have as good coverage as this. But like with Esplanade, when you spray it out, where it's sprayed out is where it stays. And so getting the most coverage and the best coverage is the best with products like that. Usually when you're doing a backpack, I tell people if you can install a PSI gauge, that's probably real important. Most of the time a backpack, 20 to 30 PSI when you're pumping is usually what you can get up to. The most accurate backpack now is actually the battery operated backpacks, but they're usually at 40 PSI. And so that kind of changes how much output you're putting out because of the PSI. So put that on. But I will tell you, if you can go to electric battery operated backpack, it's a lot easier to spray because you're not pumping up things all the time, and you're more accurate because of that. I also tell people know your weeds. There's a lot of times that people don't know their weeds, and I'll tell you why here shortly. But you can contact us, send us pictures, or you can contact your extension service people, or usually most states will have a contracted professor that can tell you what your weeds are. And this is an example why. Just the other day, I had a phone call and they said that the bare ground didn't work and they were trying to blame Esplanade. And I told them, I go, what weed broke through that you're blaming on Esplanade? And they go, well, it was wild carrot, which is a perennial out in our area. And a lot of times the herbicides that you spray will only work on certain weeds. And we know that Esplanade only works on annual grasses and annual broadleaves or the perennial and biennial plants when they come from seed. If they're already out there growing, Esplanade will not work on them. Usually you got to put a herbicide in the tank that will control that weed. So, for example, like down in California, we see a lot of Johnson grass break through the treatments down there because it's a perennial grass. Bermuda grass is a perennial grass. It won't work on that, or quackgrass. Esplanade's usually fairly safe on the perennial weeds. And so you got to make sure you know what kind of weeds you have out there. One of the apps that I use, it costs about $30 a year, is Picture This. It works very good, usually on broadleaf weeds. It's not as good on grass weeds, or I shouldn't call them weeds at times because sometimes native grasses aren't weeds, but usually the grasses it doesn't identify as good, but it's not bad too. And again, if you don't know what the weed is, you could also send pictures to your area sales manager or talk to the extension service. You could also use some of these books. I feel probably the best set is The Weeds of California. It has a volume 1 and 2. And it's also broken out into families, which I really like, and I'll tell you why here shortly. We used to use Weeds of the West out here because that's the first book that really came out 30 years ago, but there was a lot of mistakes in it, but they've updated it now, so it's not as bad. Or you could get Weeds of the Northeast too. The one reason I want to know what family a lot of these weeds are in is because usually the weeds that are in the same family, normally the herbicide that works on one of those weeds will work on the other weeds in that family. So, for example, the mustard family, usually SUs like Teller and Escort work real well on it. The figwort family, which has Dalmatian and yellow toadflax in it, Tellar works out well on that weed, and we didn't know on rattleweed up in northern Idaho, but rattleweed was in that figwort family, and we put Tellar on it, and it ended up working on it really well. So that's why kind of knowing what weeds your family are in, usually the herbicide will work on that. And I'll tell you right now, all the herbicides that are out there, they don't all work. There isn't one herbicide that works on everything. I had a guy that I gave a presentation to yesterday, and he come up and he asked, is there a herbicide that works on everything? And even Roundup anymore does not work on anything. There's a lot of resistance out there, so that's why we tank mix. Usually with resistance, if you have like more than 80% resistance, if you do a tank mix, we have found that you can knock it down to like 20% resistance. And WSU out in my area has done a lot of studies on that. So breaking that resistance, which I'll talk about here a little bit later, is real important. Also, timing. I always tell people spraying your weeds, it's usually the difference between getting control or not getting control. And knowing your weeds and when they come up is real important, because you will have summer annual weeds out there or winter annual weeds. And for example, like kochia, Russian thistle, puncture vine, turkey mullein, there's summer germinating weeds, which they usually come up in January and die in October. And then you have winter annual weeds like cheatgrass or common grounds, a henbit, shepherd purse that will actually come up in the fall and die towards the summer. And then again, you also have perennial weeds, which only live 2 years. So like common mullein, tansy ragwort, Scotch thistle, musk thistle, milk thistle, diffuse knapweed, and hound's tongue, they'll come up the first year, and then they won't actually set seed until the second year. And so usually on that first year, if they're coming from seed, like Esplanade will work on them. If they're coming up On the second year, Esplanade won't work, and that's when you need to put a different herbicide in the mix to take out that second year plant. Perennials, some of them last more than 3 years. Like alfalfa's in there too as a perennial. It could last, more than 12 years. Dalmatian toadflax is an interesting perennial because it actually comes up like right now in October, November, and then it blooms and it looks like it dies, but then it comes back from its roots. Canada thistle kind of does the same thing, but most of the time it's growing all year and it's a big root system. So usually if you can spray the whole area where the root system's all connected, you could take it out. Scouring rush is another perennial out there that comes up from root all the time that dies off. So there's many perennials out there, and that's when you need to realize that some of these herbicides will work on the biennials or perennials, and you need to add them in with like the Esplanade. So talking about like 3 different weeds that we deal with in the Pacific Northwest. And we have cheatgrass up here. It's a winter annual. It starts growing if you have moisture. Usually I had stuff up here in August growing where I was irrigating, and it seeded out in September. And then I have stuff that's coming up that where I didn't irrigate right now, and then I'll have another flush come up usually in February. So some of these weeds will come up several times of the year, even though they may be a winter annual. And that's where you do need to put glyphosate in to take them out, because you could have several flushes and several sizes, and a lot of the products will only work on them as a pre-emergent or when they're small. Glyphosate's really the only one that works on it when it's up and big and is starting to produce seed. So you also can use herbicides like Esplanade that the cheatgrass seed only lasts about 3 years to 4 years. And products like Esplanade, if you start using them, will actually take out the cheatgrass seed source there, and you won't see it usually within 4 years. So there are some herbicides that will work on that too. Russian thistle. Russian thistle is an interesting weed. Right now I have probably 1 inch to 2 inch Russian thistle that came up from the moisture we've had. I flagged it because I can't find a professor that will tell me over the winter, because we usually get freezing weather, but I think some of these plants that are coming up, I'm worried about them overwintering, so I'm flagging them in seed. But most time we'll have germinating Russian thistle in January and February up here. And again, the seeds last 2 to 3 years, and there's a lot of resistance to them. And this is on my place where you could see, and I'm up in Washington, so it's fairly cold where I'm at. But even in February, we'll have 1 or 2 leaf Russian thistles. So you do need to watch with that. Now, as far as kochia, that usually comes up more in March or April. The issue with kochia is usually if you see that picture on the right, it's real fuzzy. So you got to add a surfactant in there to get through that fuzziness of that plant. I tell people if you are doing later bare ground treatments after March, normally in a lot of areas you don't have moisture, and almost all herbicides need moisture to incorporate them. So don't spray in June, July, or August, because in a lot of areas we don't have rain if you look at it. And normally you only get 60% control of your herbicides working. You also need to put a herbicide in if you do have weeds that are up, like glyphosate, to kill like kochia or Russian thistles if it's up, if you're going later in the season, or put contacts in with glyphosate, because we have resistant Russian thistle to glyphosate up here. So we put contact herbicides in with it. Like glufosinate, carfentrazone, or contact herbicides like that to help kill it. I've also found out by adding Aus in, a lot of times you will have that seed that's germinated in the soil that you got to kill. So Aus will kill it in the soil, or we have Plainview, which is Esplanade method, and imazapyr altogether. It's imazapyr that will kill the seed in the soil, because glyphosate won't kill any seeds in the soil, only what's emerged out of the on top of the soil. So some more tips and tricks. Water conditioners, I kind of talked to you about them, and the pH adjusters. Non-ionics, I stay away from them because normally they'll bounce off of hairy weeds, and we have a lot of hairy weeds up in my area. So I prefer to use a silicone plus MSO surfactant because usually the silicone will break through like the hairiness of the kochia plant. So if you are spraying small kochia plants with the bare ground, adding in a silicone and MSO surfactant helps with that. Make sure you spray out everything every night. There's a lot of times I know counties and stuff will leave stuff in there, but there are a lot of our products will settle and end up kind of having crusts on the bottom of the saddle tank. So if you could spray them out every night, that's real important. And if you're using like a Flumi product and you have higher pH water and you didn't put a pH adjuster in there, it'll be gone the next day. So that's why I tell people to spray out everything that you have. If you're more of a golf course type company or even turf company, this has happened a lot where employees have dumped in glyphosate and they didn't mean to, and they ended up killing greens or some lawns. So the one product I tell people to lock up for sure, I tell everybody to lock up their herbicides, but to lock up the glyphosate separate because there's so many different brands of glyphosate now that and some of the labels look like your fungicides or your herbicides for lawn. So if you could lock up your glyphosate separate, that's real important. And also to tell if you're working with a public works or companies like that, tell them to make sure they throw away their jugs when they're done with them and not allow the maintenance guys to put like oil or things like that in the pesticide jugs, because I've seen that too. And they've ended up spraying out some of the oil. So you got to watch that too. One of the surfactants that I feel that works best with our bare ground products like Esplanade and Method would be soil retention product. Normally you can get 15 to 20% more active ingredient to the ground, which means you get an extra month or two out of those herbicides over the year, especially if you're trying to get a year. And some of those products would be like Efficax grounded or infused up in my area. And we feel it's very important to put that with it. And I already mentioned the Amazon silicone. Up in my area, it's usually Dynamic Siltac or Phase or those type products that work really well on common mullein and kochia, and then real well on Dalmatian toadflax and rush skeleton weed. Dry products, I have figured out over the years the best way to get them mixed up because ATVs and backpack sprayers don't have very good agitation. I like to take a 5-gallon bucket, add 4 gallons of water in there, and then the TLR Escort House or House Extra, and I use a paint stirrer in a battery operated drill, and they mix up in less than a minute and they don't go out of suspension. So that's the best way to get them into suspension. Make sure you rotate to different herbicide groups about every 3 years. And you can go under the Weed Society of America, and that will pull up your list of herbicide groups. I always tell people if you can rotate off of one group, it's real important to do that. Speed by ground, you don't want to go more than 10 miles per hour. I've had DOT trucks and other type trucks where they're going 15 miles per hour, and it's too fast. So if you can go 10, that's the best. There are wind is one thing that gets brought up all the time, and a lot of trucks will have wind meters on them, but you can buy handheld wind meters to actually get that. This is one thing that came up a lot this year. A lot of equipment, spray equipment, comes with filters. Check your filters. If you're at 80 or 100 mesh, and usually 100 mesh is standard in a lot of equipment, that's too fine of a strainer. So you need to go down to a 50 mesh, especially if you're spraying Esplanade out, because it's a little thicker, and you normally will not get any plugging if you're at 50 mesh or higher. And I've seen that this year a bunch of times. The other thing is with some of these tip strainers are coming with check valves. If they have check valves, you need to make sure that all the strainers have the check valve. Otherwise, they won't work too well. And make sure you check your strainers before you're spraying. Even in backpacks, you need to make sure in line to check the strainers because they can plug up. And this is in more like rogators or bigger sprayers. A lot of them will come with the 100 mesh. You need to, again, switch down to 50 mesh or not use any at all. And that's usually the chart that you could go with that tells you your size mesh. Boom buster nozzles versus flat fan. Flat fan's always the best. It's been tested over the years for bare ground, post-submerge, and all that. So if you could do more flat fan spraying with booms, that's better than the boom busters. But when you get in areas that is steep terrain or a lot of different terrain, that becomes an issue. And stainless nozzles are the best. Brass can plug up from wettable powders, DFs. And plastic is hard to clean if they do plug up, so that's the best. I like 110 spray angle on a nozzle. You can buy 82, but 110 seems to be the best. And if you're at 110 on your nozzle side, normally you'll be at 20-inch spacing, and that's what most equipment is set up when you go to buy it. So. Change your nozzles at least every 5 years, or look at them at least. Look at the spray pattern on concrete. That way you could see that everything's overlapping. And again, take a tape measure. Have a tape measure in there because when you're measuring out along the road and you do have a skip, you can figure out which nozzles are not overlapping correctly. As far as droplet size, we want at least 300 to 350 micron size. If you're smaller than that, you're probably going to be drifting, but a lot of, like in Dazaflam, which is Esplanade, we like it at like 350 micron size. If you are spraying next to trees, try to stay at least 1.5 times the height of the tree or shrub away from them, because products like Milestone, High Noon, will kill arborvitaes or shrubs. Crowbar, Sahara, Mojave, Diron, they all will kill trees, and even Method will. So if you are spraying around trees, you do need to watch and stay at least 1.5 times the height away from them, or switch out the products to where they won't bang the trees. And with that, that was my part. I'll hand it over to Shannon.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. You got through a lot of material in that little section. So I'm going to spend some time on, I'm just going to talk about mixing order of herbicides in my section. We wanted to devote quite a bit of time to this because it is really important. And as we went through the year, so a big part of my job is to look at sites when things don't work. So when you have an issue and you've used our products and something happened and didn't work, my job is to come look at it and figure out why. And so, I've noticed through the years of doing this that mixing order we're not always following mixing order properly. And I just think a lot of people haven't learned, or there's so many different types of products on the market now, including like adjuvants or other additives that you can add to your tank. And it's hard to know where to put those. And so we wanted to just go in depth into this topic and talk about, how to add these products in the proper order. So I'll start, and I'm going to say this a bunch of times with these slides, read your labels. And I know that this is probably the most boring reading. It's great bedtime reading if you can't sleep. And, I do a lot of writing of labels. So I know the language it's technical and it's boring, but it's really important that we do read them because it has really good information. And we spend time writing these labels to get all that information on there for you, and so that you're doing things the right way. So when it comes to mixing order, a lot of products will specify that on the label. And so when you go to mix your products, follow those directions. But not all products do talk about mixing order, or not all products talk about mixing order very extensively. So there's a wide range on product labels. So if there's not mixing order on one product, just use the directions from another label, or use the Wales method. And we're going to go through what that is in just a few slides here. So if there isn't instructions on the label, or certain products are not mentioned as being tank mix compatible. And so you'll find a section. So down here, I have a snippet from the plain view label, and there's a whole section on compatibility. So oftentimes labels will tell you what products can be mixed with that product, but it's not going to be an exhaustive list. It's not going to have every product that's out there. And so you might run into products that are not listed. And so the best ways to do a jar test on the plain view label, we actually have these instructions on kind of how to perform this, but sprayers101.com, that URL right there has some good detailed instructions on how to do a jar test. But basically you're putting the herbicides that you want to tank mix all into a jar, agitating that by shaking it and waiting about 15 minutes. And then you see if you have any weird reactions like clumping or separation or things like that. If you do, that means those herbicides are probably not compatible. When you do your jar test, follow the right mixing order as well, because that obviously will be important too. You need to perform it like you're putting it in the tank. But so very important if you're not sure on if products can be mixed to do that test. So where do you find the labels? So you're able to look at this information. Well, cdms.net is a great site. That's what I usually use to pull up labels. You can, Agrian is another place you can access them. And then for our products, you can visit our website, us.envu.com, and you can pull up the labels for our products, as well as other like the SDS sheets and additional labels as well. So we have the main herbicide label, and then sometimes on products we'll have a 2EE label, which is an additional label we've written after the main label that could add some different things, like maybe a new species that's controlled or a recommendation for tank mixing for certain species. So CDMS, a great source to find all of those type of labels. Like I said, I was going to talk about labels a lot. So just to finish that off, read the label. The label is the law. So as the applicator, you're responsible. So if you do something off label, you're always going to be responsible for that mishap. And so, it doesn't matter what you've been told by somebody else or anything else like that, you're still responsible. Or even if you have a supervisor that tells you to do something, you still need to be responsible for reading that label and knowing if it's okay. This is just an example of mixing instructions on a label. We chose the Esplanade 200SC because it has really thorough tank mix instructions. So I liked this label, but I highlighted maintain sufficient agitation. When we say sufficient, that means about 5 to 10 minutes. You want to at least agitate for 5 minutes when you are doing the agitation step to really get the products mixed in. Another thing is, so this is just pulled from the method 240SL, again, at least 5 minutes till the herbicide is fully dispersed. The thicker the product, you want to mix it more. You may need to mix it up first in another tank. Jerry went over that. And I'll talk about that a little bit with the dry ingredients when we get to that part of the mixing order. So the Wales method, what is that? And we have a sheet that I think Hallie has posted in the chat that you can download, or you can also contact us to get one that kind of goes through application and mixing, but it has the Wales method. And so this is a little more thorough than what we have on the sheet because I just tried to account for a lot of different products being used. But this is just talking about more of the herbicide focused and then surfactants at the end. I'm going to go into a more detailed mixing order after this one when we talk about putting other additives in the tank. But the W stands for our dry ingredients, basically our wettable powders, water dispersible granules, dry flowables. And so a lot of these, especially on the dry flowable, you're going to want to slurry those first. And so slurry is to add it to another smaller container with water, mix that very well and let it disperse into the water and then add it to your tank. Otherwise, so these are products like Telar, Escort, you want to slurry those, add it to your tank after that. Otherwise they can just drop to the bottom and don't get agitated into the solution very well. Then A is for agitate. So we want to agitate always after our dry ingredients. Then L is for liquids, and I'm going to go more in detail in the next slides in these. Then we have E for our emulsifiable concentrates, and S for surfactants. So if you just remember that basic order, that'll help you in a lot of your tank mixing process. Wear the proper PPE. in accordance with the labels. So you need to, again, read the label to know what's required. The picture on the right is going to be your standard for applying any pesticide, long sleeve shirt, gloves, pants, shoes plus socks. But then on the left is some labels will require something like a filter or a chemical apron. And so you need to know if those things are required with the products you're applying. So here's the more detailed tank order. I'm going to go into these steps individually, so I won't spend a lot of time on here, but you know, we've kind of broken it down into 9 steps for all the steps you need to take to tank mix your products. So first off, fill the tank, 1/2 to 3/4 full of water. We actually have seen people not do this, that they've just dumped their herbicides right in before putting water. So never do that, especially salt-based products. It could cause them to salt out. So you're like 2,4-D, your Roundup, things like that, and they'll become less effective. But we always want to have water in the tank first to be adding our products to. Step 2 would be to add our compatibility agents and defoamers. And so these are not going to be our adjuvants. Those are going to come last, but something like your defoamer compatibility agent will be added first once you have your water in. And then you're going to agitate, or you want to agitate between each step or have constant agitation in your tank for some of these products. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide. Jerry talked about water conditioners and buffers a lot, so that was great. And then I'm going to just add a little bit more to break this down. So there's some different water conditioners that can be used. So you need to be testing your water. So Jerry talked about that. Well, you can test for pH with the strips. You can send your water in to different labs, and they will give you a water report on hardness and the different things that are in there. So in water, we can have things like calcium, magnesium, sodium, and we have high amounts of these. They can bind, especially our weak acid herbicides. And so they'll make those herbicides essentially less effective. So the more particles you have in your water that are binding to your herbicide, then the less effective your herbicide becomes. So our water conditioners, what they do is you add those in, and then they bind those particles, and then when we add our herbicide in, it won't be bound. And so that's essentially the purpose of a water conditioner. There's some different recommendations. It's on how, you know, what counts as water hardness. I put over 150 ppm, but for something, glyphosate is really sensitive. So Jerry did say over 100 for that. I think on our other ones, we don't need to worry about as much until we get to a little bit higher, maybe 150, 200 ppm. There's a wide range of advice on what qualifies as hard water, but usually 150 is hard. We have a suggested rate of about 10 pounds per 100 gallons for AMS. There's a little bit of a range. It could be 8 to 17 pounds per 100 gallons, but 10's a good number to go with. AMS breaks down quickly. So again, like Jerry, I'll just re-emphasize, spray your solution out the day that you mix it, because a lot of these things aren't going to be working the next day. They'll break down in your tank. When we use something like dicamba, a lot of times it's recommended to use a non-AMS based water conditioner. In crop, it actually is required because it can cause some volatility issues. And so when you're using dicamba and you have a hard water issue, then choose a non-AMS based water conditioner. And AMS stands for ammonium sulfate, in case you didn't know the acronym there. Then the other thing we can add are acidifying agents or pH buffers. So herbicide is very sensitive to the pH of our water. So another reason we need to be using those test strips. Something like the SUs actually prefer a more neutral or alkaline pH, so a pH of 7 to 8, where some of our weak acids or PPOs work better in a more acidic condition. And when we get to that more neutral point, they actually start to break down much quicker and are less effective. So we want to make sure we're adjusting their water. And a very important thing is you need to test your water after you add each product. When you add glyphosate in the tank, it will reduce the pH. So you need to be testing it after you add different products to know where you're at and if you need to add anything. Then you're going to want to agitate after that step. And then step 4 is going to be, again, this goes back to we're getting into our Wales method. We're going to add our dry ingredients. So something like a Velapar, Escort, Austeller. We talked about making those into a slurry and then slowly adding to the spray tank. Other dry products can include those water-soluble packets, water-soluble fertilizers, soluble powders. Then we're going to want to agitate again. And after these dry products, it's really important to agitate for at least 5 minutes. If constant agitation is better, so if you have a tank with a constant agitation, that's going to be better for mixing and keeping things into solution. And then step 6, we're going to add our liquid products. So those are going to be, well, we're going to start with our flowables, our suspension concentrates, so our SCs. So we have a lot of products that fall into this category, like Plainview or Esplanade, and then microemulsions. I want to talk a little bit more about flowables or suspension concentrates. So these are solid active ingredients that are dispersed in water. And so they need to be added to the tank first before we add in. We're going to go into the next step after this, our other liquid products like glyphosate method and things like that are soluble liquids. But these need to be added first because those other soluble liquids can cause issues if they're added before our suspension concentrates or flowables. Since they're not water soluble, they will settle out if they're not agitated, and that can cause plugged nozzles, obviously decreased efficacy in the field. So we talked about like Esplanade, Plainview. Some other products you might be using are Detail, saflofenicil, or most atrazine mixes. Atrazine you're probably not using as much. That's going to be more in crops, but they are going to have the settling issue. So we need to make sure we're really agitating these. And if we let our tank set for a while, that we re-agitate before spraying. And we actually have instructions on the Esplanade label that talks about re-agitation. So you're going to agitate again. And then we get to step 7, which is going to be what I talked about, our water-soluble liquid. So it's really important we add these products, especially glyphosate products, after our other liquid formulations like our suspension concentrates, because a lot of times these can be loaded with surfactant. So glyphosate is one that's commonly loaded with a surfactant. But some other soluble liquid products would be, for example, Method 240SL. And then step 8 is going to be our emulsifiable concentrates. So something like pendimethalin, which is in pendulum, and then our emulsion and water products. So a couple you may be using Speed Zone, Dimension. Going to add those in that order. And then we get to our last step, which is step 9. So these are going to be your surfactants, things like your NIS, your crop oil, methylated seed oil. It's really important we're adding our surfactants last because they can, if they're added to the tank first, they can tie up other herbicides, especially something like Esplanade. So if you're using Esplanade, you really need to be following this order. You should be following this order no matter what, but it can really impact Esplanade. Then your dyes and your drift reduction agents all come at this step. And then just our last, I think this is kind of my last thoughts. These are Jerry's thoughts actually, but he provided them to me very kindly. Marking dye just depends on where you're using it, but it can be a good option to make sure you're getting good spray patterns and you're not overlapping too much or not enough. Bleach can take away that blue color that can stain so many things. And you just need to watch your tank when you're using soil retention products and blue dye. There can be some antagonism with these products. So just, again, the jar test is always a good method to test for something like that. This is my last slide, but again, if the label or SDS sheet doesn't provide the formulation of the product or even things like mixing instructions, always reach out to the manufacturer representative if you have questions or need to know information on that, and they can provide that. And so with that, I think we'll have Hallie take it over and open up for questions.
Let's do it. We got a couple of questions in the chat, and I got a couple of questions via text message, so we'll just do them one at a time. I will mention, if you don't know who your Envu rep is, you can just Google Envu Vegetation Management Rep Finder. There's a map there, and you can see who the rep is for your area of the United States. All right, first question. This was an offline question. For bare ground, I'm going to start using RV antifreeze propylene glycol at 1 gallon per 25 gallons water to extend the spray season and lower the freezing point of the solution. I know most surfactants have some OH in them, but at higher concentrations, will it have any issues with efficacy on Esplanade or method? Jerry, this may be a good one for you.
It's a tough one because up here we always freeze up, and really I haven't tried the RV antifreeze. We've done 32 fertilizer, like 10 gallons per 100 gallons of water, and we've got that to keep things from freezing up. I don't know about the RV antifreeze. I can't answer that one. So what about you, Shannon?
Yeah, yeah, that one we might have to refer to our team of chemists that we have, but I would say no, it's not something. I don't know if we've tested it or not in terms of its impact to Esplanade, so I just avoid adding something like that to the tank.
It's a good follow-up question. I'll follow up on that one. Okay. Jerry, why do brass nozzles plug up with wettable powders and dry fluibles, but stainless steel ones don't?
That's a good question too. That's just what I've seen over the years. It's something to deal with the brass, and that's why the stainless steel nozzles or even the ceramic nozzles come out, was because of a lot of plugging issues. And back then we used a lot of wettable powders too, and a lot of the products have gone to WDGs because of that reason. So you don't see too many brass nozzles anymore. So any addition on that, Shannon? Or
no, I think that was a pretty good answer.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Here's a question. Oh, Jason Belcher, who's also on our stewardship team, says that brass is more reactive than stainless steel. So that would make sense. Go back to the questions here. All right. A lot of companies are selling pre-mixed containers with custom herbicide blends. So all the applicator has to do is add the correct amount of water. The pros of this are fairly obvious, but are there any cons to using a pre-mixed blend rather than all the manual mixing you guys are discussing?
I've had some issues. I assume they're talking about Continuum, coming from some of the companies that pre-mix them up. The only thing I've seen become an issue, I would tell you, you need to make sure you try to run those mixes through your pump before you put them in the tank, before you spray out. I have seen where some of the SUs like Telar weren't broke down good enough and they took out some pumps, but you know, that was like 5 years ago. And I went through the discussion with all the Continuum companies, and most of the time they're mixing up the SUs better now than they were. But always run the mixes through to make sure they're mixed up, because you could still get settling in the 15s or the 30s too. So
yeah.
And even in 2.5s, our competition has a product that settles out. So even if it's a premix, I would tell you to shake it real well, or make sure you run it through the your agitation, and then run it through the pumps for at least 5 or 10 minutes. Make sure it's mixed up.
Yeah, and I would add custom blends are a great way to go for applicators. It makes it really easy when you're running huge amounts of bare ground programs and you have a custom mix that you're using. So I would just say, make sure you're working with your distributor. They're going to find a reputable blender or work with a reputable blender. But most of them, I mean, they do this as their business, and so they do a good job. You can sometimes run into issues. You could always check too with how they're mixing. As an applicator, you can call them up and say, you know, are you following the right order of, you know, blending this? Have you talked to the manufacturers of these herbicides to make sure you're following the technical guidelines of it, especially with things like Esplanade. Again, it's so critical that it gets put in the right place, even with these custom blends. And so there's a lot of blends that are including Esplanade. And so we want to make sure it's getting mixed right in the tank. So they're always welcome to call us, your custom blender, and we can provide guidance on that. But they are a great way to go for applicators. I would say with things like Plainview is such a great product because it's our Esplanade method and imazapyr, and it's already blended for you. And we did all the efficacy research on that, and the work with the formulations team to get that right. And so Plainview is a great option if you are going to be using those 3 products in your tank, to just go with the Plainview over mixing them yourselves. But if you're using a bunch of different products from different companies, you can definitely mix them yourself, just follow the right order, but a custom blender is a good way to go as well.
And I did do testing on custom blends. We know with the counties and the DOTs, we save at least an hour of cleaning out jugs and disposing of jugs by going to the custom blend. So you do save at least an hour a day of having to do cleanup.
That is a very nice savings. I think we all have cleaned out lots of jugs, and it's kind of a headache at the end of the day. Let's see, I got another question here. This question came in kind of early in the presentation, so we've covered part of it. When you're mixing different formulations, is there a sequence you want to follow? Yes, and we will. I couldn't add the file to the chat, but I will add that one-sheeter reference in an email and send you an email after this presentation. But the second part of this is there anything we should definitely avoid mixing?
Oh, that one's a tough one. Are they asking about bare ground, or because I could tell you where situations like if you're doing basil treatments, you don't want to put a water-based product in when you're doing a basil treatment. You just want to use the oil, basil oil with like the herbicide. And if you don't do that, oh, I know one. So if you guys get a hold of purple dye, don't put purple dye in your mixes, because purple dye was made for the forestry companies to put with oil-based products. And if you put it in any of these bare ground products that are water-based, you will definitely have globbing in there. So yeah, so there are some products that, and you need to call your rep that we've seen that you don't want to put, because I know a distributor out here was getting rid of the purple dye, but they didn't tell anybody. So we had that situation happen. So.
Yeah, and I would add there's like some fertilizers that you wouldn't want to put in with your herbicides. So that's why it's really important, again, to read the labels of everything. And also mixing, other type of pesticides with your herbicides, like fungicides or insecticides. It can cause a interaction between them, and it can heat up your herbicide. So this is more not bare ground, but if you're doing like, a site where you want selective weed treatment, you can cause some significant injury by mixing in some insecticides. We've seen this happen on hay fields and things like that with your herbicides, because it will heat up those herbicides. So, an AMS at high rates can also heat up herbicides. So I guess not that they won't mix, but it can cause some issues with the products you do have in there.
Thank you both for that. We got a question here that I think I can answer. I recently heard about some FMC compounds with good activity against kochia. And what can we expect from Envu's new portfolio in seeking new solutions for difficult to control weeds like kochia? The answer to this is still a little unclear. So we did just complete the acquisition of FMC, and so we're still in the process of evaluating exactly what has come over, what our rights are to those products. And so we're working to identify exactly how products like sulfentrazone and carfentrazone could be added to our current portfolio in IVM. We'll keep everybody updated about this as it progresses. Maybe Jerry, I think you've used sulfentrazone and carfentrazone in the past. Could you share your experience with those products?
Yeah, both the products are really good. Up in my area, we use a lot of sulfentrazone and Espinade together because of its safety around trees and things like that. And it works great on Russian thistle and kochia. So hopefully the portfolio will come back out because it was a great formulation too. But again, we're waiting on that. I've used carfentrazone too. I wanted that product years ago because as far as a contact herbicide, it works very good for helping to burn down kochia and Russian thistle, both post-emergent, or I guess that's the only time it will work, post-emergent. But in your bare ground situation, if you do have resistant Russian thistle, the glyphosate, that's where the carfentrazone will come in and help burn down the Russian thistle. So yeah, so hopefully we will have both those products coming.
And I would add for resistant kochia, also very important, these PPO inhibitors. So we've been working a lot with improving kochia. Kochia is just a really hard weed to control in bare ground situations, and adding something like a PPO, like a sulfentrazone, can really help when we're going at those later season post-application times.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, and thank you, Shannon. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. We are right at the hour, so we won't keep folks too long, but thanks everybody for attending. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to your Envu rep and we'll be glad to get them answered. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.